Now, I hate to disillusion all you nice people, but I am not perfect. Neither are you. All of us are, and a better word maybe is inadequate. When you consider, some of the things that we've been talking about here so far, about the kind of problems that we face, about the difficulties of working with people who are aggressive and new and have all kinds of new ideas and are very sensitive, as one person put it, the task seems impossible. And actually that is pretty close to right if you look at it from one perspective. I am inadequate to solve certain kinds of those problems. You are inadequate to solve some of those problems. And there is nothing that I know of that so effectively exposes a person's inadequacies as the ministry. Once you know, it may not always expose those inadequacies to other people, but it will expose them to you. Now, I use the term ministry here in a very broad sense. I'm talking about the ordained ministry, teaching ministry such as myself, but I'm also talking about the person who undertakes a ministry to hospitals, a person who undertakes a ministry to the sick in the church, a person who undertakes a ministry to children in the sense of Sabbath schools, of whatever else it is. Nothing so effectively exposes a person's inadequacies as the ministry. Guess where we really begin to get into trouble? It's when we try to paper over those inadequacies and pretend that they're not there. To pretend that we can solve problems that we can't solve. To pretend that we don't have weaknesses that we do have. These are the areas that we get into that can really cause us a lot of problems. Now, I hate to, again, disillusion you, but the ministry is an impossible task. When you consider the things that a minister is supposed to be, the things that he's supposed to do, the skills that he's supposed to have. I wish I had a copy of a little thing somebody had written down about what a minister is supposed to be, but it emphasizes very effectively the fact that there are a lot of contradictory qualities called for in a minister, and that there is no way on the face of God's good green earth that any individual is going to be able to meet all of those. Some of us may have this gift, others of us may have another gift, and it's what Paul's talking about when he says God gave one man a gift of helps, he gave another man a gift of healing, another man he gave this gift or that gift, to every man according to his several abilities, that the gifts of God are not all bunched up in one place. And my experience has been that the stronger a person is in certain areas, he will have weaknesses in other areas. It's as though there is a bucket full of strength, and the more of that power you put into teaching, the less of it there is left over here for, let's say, pastoring or shepherding. In other words, there are only so much power available to every one of us. We have to make decisions about how we use it. It's like your house, you've got certain limitations on the power that comes into your house. You can only use so many appliances. You can only put so many of them on one outlet. We already know that. What you may not realize is that there are only so much you can put on your house in all of your outlets, as far as the power of the equipment. You start blowing fuses. Same thing is true of an individual. You don't exactly blow fuses, although there may be even an analogy there, that whenever you start trying to load up in too many areas, that you just can't effectively do the job. We are inadequate, and we always will be, and the sooner we realize that, the quicker we can become effective in our own areas of the ministry and doing what we're supposed to do. If you try to do everything, if you try to take on everything, you are absolutely certain to fail. If you can just write that down in your book of remembrances and never let that get away from you, that if you try to do too much, you are certain to fail. It will not measure up. One of the causes of troubles that I have seen in the ministry over the years, and not just in this church, but I had a lot of experience in the worldwide church too, is the minister who tries to do it all. And he tries to keep his finger on everything that's going on. Tries to plug up every hole that starts leaking or springing a leak. Tries to cover every contingency, every problem. Has to be involved in every decision. that has to be made, he is going to fail. I was struck by the fact that Tip O'Neill said the other day that as he was retiring, that the president whom he loved the most was Jimmy Carter. In a lot of ways respected the most. He said he was one of the most able men that is ever in the White House. And yet Jimmy Carter is not perceived particularly as a competent, effective president, is he? But he was a highly intelligent man. Now, I don't know what his problem was, but I've heard it hinted that one of the problems was that he tried to do too much. That he had to even make decisions about who played on the White House tennis courts. And you get in that kind of situation, and he's going to eat you alive. So when you keep those perspectives and realize that you have to, do you really feel like you know very much about yourself? I mean, how well do you know you? What you can do and what you can't do. You ever sat down and really kind of done an appraisal? You know, you can do an inventory, right? You can go through your house and inventory your belongings. You can count your books, write down, number down on a piece of paper. You can write down, I got a television set. Maybe I got two. I got one in the living room, got one in the bedroom. I have a VCR. I can write all those things down on the paper. How about a personal inventory of yourself? You can start down by writing, saying, I've got 24 hours in a day. Every one of us has the same amount of time in a day. I have to spend so many hours of that asleep, or else I'm no good for anything the rest of the day. So I got to do that. I know where that goes. I'm going to have to spend a certain amount of time getting up in the morning, getting myself going, getting grooming, jump-starting myself, you know, as it were, having the cup of coffee. I got to have breakfast. I know that normally there's about an hour and a half from the time I get up to the time I leave for work, or whatever it is in your case. I know I have to spend 8 hours a day at my job. I know I have to give my attention to that job or I could lose it. You know, I have to do that. I cannot neglect that job, or else in one sense of the word, I'm disobeying another biblical commandment. You know, being subject to your masters and doing a good job. Those of us who are in God's church, even though we are leaders in the church and accepting more responsibility in the church, have an even greater responsibility at our jobs. Because you can ruin your reputation among those who are without. And guess what's isn't that one of the qualifications for the ministry? A good reputation of them that's without. I want to remind you of something about those qualifications for the ministry, and I'd like all of you, ladies, gentlemen, all of you to study them. They are the requirements of every member of the church. Look at them. Every member of the church is supposed to measure up to that. You just can't be ordained. You can attend, though. You can be a member if you don't measure up to it, but you're not supposed to be a minister, ordained, if you don't measure up to it. But it's what's expected of every one of them, including a good report of them who are without. So we ought to be working hard at that job. You've got to put that down there. It's one of the things that you have to do today. After you get all through this inventory, you're going to find I've got so much time a day that I can give to God's work. Because I have my family, you know, I've got my chores. And if the time you have left for God's work is an hour a day, don't try to put in 2 and neglect something else that you really should be doing. I think there are people who have done this. You know, they have neglected their families and then wound up having problems with their children and winding up being disqualified for ministerial responsibilities when all they had to really do was keep those things that God requires of them in their order and do their inventory. Anyway, and then there come the question of what are the tasks, what's the inventory of tasks that are before me? And of course when you do that, the church, you've got an absolutely, and it stretches to the horizon. I don't know how long God is going to give me to live, but I will not be finished. I will not be finished. If I live long enough, I'm going to put the entire Bible on tape with commentary. I am now on tape 37, and I have not yet finished I have just finished what are probably truly Paul's epistles, but I still have Hebrews to do. I have gone all the way through the epistles, 37 tapes. Hebrews will probably take another 3. I will have 40 tapes done at that point. Then I'm going to do the general epistles. And then I hope to begin to do some Old Testament work. And if I live long enough, I will put the whole Bible on tape. But then after I get through with that, I've got some other things I want to do. You know, I've got more to do. And I really have my doubts as to whether I'll get that tape project finished, by the time I'm 70 years old, because of interruptions and other things that have to be done. Now, Charles Dorothy, some of you know Charles, made a statement, a sermon one time. It's one thing I did learn from Charles. Learned a few other things along the way, but we'll let that slide. But I did learn this. He made a statement. He said, God does not intend for you to have enough time to do everything you want to do. Doesn't intend it. He actually planned that you would not have enough time to do everything you want to do. Think about it. Makes sense? Why did he do it? Tell me. Yeah, why would he put, we know God's not mischievous. Right. He forces you to decide what you're going to do. And when you decide what you're going to do, guess what? You make a statement about what's important to you. Now, if you went back and inventoried your past week to say what's important to you, you can actually tell. We're not going to guess about this. We're not going to equivocate. We're not going to say what you wish was important about to you. We can actually tell what was by what you did. Now, don't get me wrong. The fact that you went fishing, last week doesn't mean that other things were not important to you. Because I'm going to go fishing, hopefully even this next week, get my trolling motor fixed. The fact of the matter is there is a certain amount of time for recreation that is important if you're going to be effective at anything else. You've got to weigh that up in your life. But the point is, you do need to take a look at what you're doing, what's important to you, and that what you do says volumes about what is important to you. Now, your task is not to do everything, but to bear some fruit. Think about that for a while. You do not have to, in order to have God say, well done, good and faithful servant, you do not have to accomplish everything. But you do have to bear some fruit. There are some things that you are going to have to get done. Now, in order for this to work for you, you're going to have to do some things that you can do and leave other things to other people. Now, if you happen to be a minister and you happen to be responsible for a local church, this also becomes very critical because, and it also becomes critical that you let the church know this somewhere along the line, that there are limitations on what I am able to do. Then inside of that, there's another boundary. That's what I am willing to do. I am not willing to do, necessarily, everything that I am able to do. Now, I wouldn't want you people to be shocked at that. Because the fact is, if I don't maintain some margin in there, along the way, I take away all my flexibility, and if I just trying to do everything I'm able to do, just right out to the limit every day, I'm likely to burn out and become useless to you at some time in the future. You need to make people aware of that my job is to bear some fruit, my job is to do my task and to leave something for you to do. But people in the church have got to understand that they have some responsibility to bear some fruit in that church. It isn't just up to you people here. It's every man jack of us, every woman of us has got to bear some fruit somewhere along the line. Now, this concept of inadequacy is important in another way. We would like to have a church that was unified, wouldn't we? Unity is something we have as a kind of a goal. It seems like it's a far-off goal. It seems like every time you have your hand on it, it squirts away. And you want to be a unified church. Give this some thought. You can preach on unity all you wish, but it will never exist without interdependence. Do you think that's true? Yeah, it has to be. It has to be. If I don't depend on you in any way, if I can get along without you entirely, there isn't much of a basis. Where's the bonding going to take place between us? And you see, unless there is some measure of bonding, is there any real unity? Does the Worldwide Church of God have a real unity? There's a superficial unity there, surely. You won't go to their church and hear false doctrine preached, unless it's the official false doctrine. Somebody's not going to be up here preaching some strange doctrine along the way. Is that unity? It is, I guess, after a fashion. It's a form of unity. But again, there's a price that goes with that. It's a frightening unity. It really is, because unity like that can lock you into error. Yeah, it can lock you into error. It can handcuff you to where you're afraid to step out, where you're afraid to take any chances to accomplish anything. Yeah.
I think when we talk about unity, don't we need to define what we mean by unity? Certainly, we're all unified by Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
As our brother, and we're all brothers, or family together, we are unified that way. What are we talking about as unity?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. Just what does constitute unity? Is it Paul preaches about it a great deal, pleads for it, Love is a factor involved in it. Like-mindedness is a factor of loving. However, like-mindedness is kind of an interesting concept. I have one of my goals is to stay alive. One of your goals is to stay alive. These are that you could call this a kind of a common goal, would you? Not really. The object of it is different. It's different. My objective is not to keep you alive. It's to keep me alive. That's not exactly a common goal. Now, if you and I staying alive depends on me keeping you alive and you keeping me alive, are we going to have some unity? Sure we are. You betcha. If I know, that both of us staying alive depends on both of us doing, this task, whatever it is, if we're lost in the wilderness or wherever we are, then we are involved right now in a bonding experience. And it is that interdependence. Now, I as a minister, if I get up before you as a minister and I begin to convey this image of impenetrability, imperviousness, of strength, of power, and all this, I can sort of collect a following in a sense, but if I don't somehow let you know that I need you, then I have left a gap in this question of unity. Because the truth is, I depend on you, and you depend on me, and that interdependency is where the unity actually does come from. And it also comes from you depending on her, and her depending on you, and this, if y'all don't depend on one another, if you don't meet any need she has, and if you don't meet any need she has, then there's nothing really between you. There is nothing between you. Yes?
Isn't that self-oriented? When you talk about interdependence upon each other, to me, it's self-oriented.
It is.
It's not much different than saying, I'm going to stay alive. My goal is to stay alive, and your goal is to stay alive. And
yep.
If you help me, I'll help you.
Right.
But shouldn't it be in a greater sense than the overall affection for somebody to look out for them more than the individual?
Absolutely, it should come from love. But now I got a question for you. Where's that coming from? Ah, yes, but how? How? Okay, but let's get down to the mechanics of it. Does it just happen mystically, or is there something that goes on? You said no. It comes through fellowship? How's it work? How does it work? Yeah.
In the military, in the job I used to wet a buddy system, because if you were working on a job and you made a mistake, it could cost you your life or injure you. So we worked as a team, so that you watched out for the other fellow. And you saw him doing something wrong, and you helped him.
Yeah.
Prevent it. Okay? Same thing through fellowship with the church.
Yeah.
We can help each other and encourage each other.
Yeah, both you and Bob are right. Bob is right in what he's saying, that it is selfish, at least in its apparent. But you see, what man is there yet who did not love his own self? Jesus said, ask that question. And you love your neighbor as yourself.
Isn't it the fact that, don't we love Christ as a result of him first loving us and giving himself for us?
Yes, we do. And you have put your finger on it. You have put your finger on it. We love him because of something he did. Pardon? Because he loved us first. That's right. Interdependence is a major factor in the creation of that love because of your meeting that need for one another. I've used the illustration of it, and I was reminded of it twice yesterday. People, I guess, had been listening to that tape I did on love not long ago, where I talked about the situation where I got up out of bed, and I just did it. It was really duty that got me out of bed. It wasn't love that got me out of bed. It was duty. I was the minister, and her little daughter had been hit by a car, and she was in the hospital, and there was a very great day. In fact, the child did die. But she was facing, surgery overnight, and so it was about 11:30 or something like that, and I got out of bed now, and we got dressed, we got in our car, and we drove, 3 hours in the middle of the night over to Little Rock Went up to the hospital and saw the little girl, laid hands on her, anointed her, and so forth. And I found a strange thing happened to me after that. That I had found suddenly in myself an affection for that woman and her daughter and her family that has persisted down through the years that I did not have before the incident. In other words, the affection for them did not take me to them. Duty took me to them. But the act of going to them generated an affection for them. A really genuine affection. And I've thought about that many times. That this building of affection comes about through interaction between people. In other words, and the funny thing about it is, and I know that it means a lot to me when somebody does something for me, and I appreciate it. But in my experience, limited as it is, I seem to grow more in my affection for people when I do something for them than I do when they do something for me.
I guess that's what I was... I mean, when you contemplate, for example, that scripture that does say that we love him because he loved us first. He loved us when we weren't even born yet.
Absolutely.
And isn't that sometimes it's the outgoing affection for somebody who you don't even know. For instance, the preaching of the gospel is a preaching to people who hopefully they will repent and be converted, who we don't even know out there. And so there is, to me...
Now, we could have an interesting philosophical discussion on this one because these people whom I don't even know, do I love them?
Well, you should.
No, not you.
That's interesting. It's interesting. Several people here say, no, you don't really. And you say, and in a way, it depends on your perspective. It depends on your, this is, again, I said, this could be a fascinating philosophical discussion. We may have to pass on from it in order to finish the other things that we want to do. But in a sense, I preach the gospel out of love for Christ, out of a sense of duty and responsibility. I really come to love people once I have come into contact with them as a result of that preaching the gospel. And I think that I could say that I love people whom I have not even met, but that's a pretty abstract concept. I think that God, loves all these people, but then He knows all these people. He knows exactly. He knows where they are. He knows what they're doing, and so forth. We could have a lot of fun with one of those. That's again something for a fireside conversation among friends to chew that one over for a while and to consider the existential considerations that go on in that one. It's rather a fascinating concept. But Larry?
One thing, I can't speak for anyone else, and maybe some of the other ministers here might be able to amen it or whatever. There are several people, well, quite a few people within the Church of God International that I have a special feeling for. And in some cases, I have met them only one time. And that was the time that I was used as an instrument to baptize them.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember, in most cases, every person, because there's not been that many, that I have baptized, because there was a special bonding that took place at that particular time between those people.
Yeah,
themselves.
that's right.
In some cases, I have not seen them since that time.
Now, let me ask you this about this. Take this a little bit further. I mentioned before that the act of doing good for other people does tend to create an affection in us toward the people to whom we do good. What happens if you have done good to them repeatedly with no appreciation?
Normally you get burned out.
You no longer have the same affection, do you? You really don't. It doesn't stay the same. Much as you might wish it otherwise, it really doesn't stay the same. If you may still love them in the biblical sense of how you are required to love your neighbor, but the affection is not there. Now, on the other hand, if the person is appreciative, the affection tends to remain, doesn't it? Why is that?
But you're to love your enemies.
Going one way.
Yeah.
I mean, you're to love your enemies, not those that... I'm
Yeah, sure you are. You're absolutely right.
And if you can't love somebody you haven't seen, how can you love your enemies?
Can you love someone and not have affection for them?
I doubt it. Not truly.
Yeah, affection for them, you want to be with them.
I can. I can love a person for whom I have no affection. Because love, agape love, is a love that is a little different from the love that we talk about in affection. What I am talking about is that which exists among brethren in the church, where Paul says, be kindly affectioned one to another, and it's more than love. It's more than the love you have. Yeah. Work my way around it. What you're saying is absolutely correct.
Just love your neighbor as yourself.
Sure.
And to love your enemies. I mean,
absolutely.
When you give an example of a good Samaritan, when Christ gave the example of the good Samaritan, they had never met each other. The two of them that walked by him, the priest and the Levite, never stopped to bother him.
Right, of course. But what are we talking about here, right now, today? We're talking about unity. You can love someone with whom you have no unity, because the unity is not reciprocated. I mean, the love is not reciprocated. When you love your enemy, he hates you. You have no unity there. What I am talking about is affection that comes from interdependence and interaction, which creates unity. And it's one of the factors as to where our problem is in the Church of God International with unity. Yeah?
Ron, would it be safe to say that, to summarize, interdependency on each other brings about, out of love, brings about an affection one for another in a group, which helps to have unity?
That's right. When
the
you
opposite being, if you don't have that love, or a rejection of that love, or like the person said, you keep you keep serving, you keep doing it out of love, then it would be a rejection, or you would lack the affection. You may still be a one-way street, like many times, that's the way it is. That brings about disunity.
That's correct. That's correct. And the areas that come about where disunity or problems in the church come from, they come from competitiveness. And a competitiveness of a peculiar sort, because I can enjoy competition with people I have an affection for if I respect them. For example, we have a kind of a running gun battle, as it were, around the office here on chess. We have a three-cornered chess game between Ted and Benny and I. And it's very competitive, and yet there is no loss of affection in that competitiveness, because we respect one another, and that love is still there. But you could easily see how if Ted and I got to competing in certain areas, that could all go by the boards in a hurry, couldn't you? There is a level of competition that could be destructive, but you see, it doesn't happen because of the genuine affection that exists between the two of us. I like Ted. I don't want to hurt him. Okay? That saying to people, I like this person. I have an affection for this person. I don't want to hurt this person. And if I do this, I am going to hurt this person. I don't want to do it. This is the kind of thing that comes out of the bonding of fellowship, of experience. And it isn't just the fellowship of sharing cookies and coffees after church. It is the bonding that can only take place. It really effectively take place when something bad happens to good people. It can only really happen when things start going wrong. That's when the test comes, and that's when you're able to hang together. And it's in meeting those trials. It's why it is so important that we have the fellowship, so we know one another, so that when things do go bad, it's shared. And I think that's a very critical aspect in the bonding of people in the church and getting people together and creating a unity. Now, I want to take us a step beyond this now to another aspect of this question, because, in one sense of the word, what I'm saying to you is that the pastor on a pedestal is an obstacle to unity in the church. As a minister, it's really necessary that I let you know what's going on inside of me. That you've got to realize that there are times when I get afraid. It's important for you to understand there are times when I feel alone. It's important for you to realize there are times when I am vulnerable, so that you understand that I have needs too. If I don't let you know those needs, you can't meet them. You can't pray for them. You can't respond to them. And consequently, there's always going to be this little distance between you and I. Now, closely related to this is a question which will come up. It'll come up again and again in the church, and it's one that we have got to, basically I understand it, And it's one we've all got to come to understand, and we've got to begin to understand it alike. In the relationship of a minister and a congregation, who works for who? And just exactly what is the relationship in a church congregation between a minister and a church congregation? Does the minister work for the people, or do they work for him? Okay. Minister is a servant. He works for the people.
It's a two-way street.
It's a two-way street. He works for the people, and the people work for him. Now, that's not bad. Ian?
Everybody really works for God.
Everybody works for God. Now, can we argue with any of that? Can't argue with any of that. We all understand it then. How come it doesn't work any better than it does? Why do we still have confusion over some things that we don't understand? Now, let me tell you something. Let me give you a principle involved. I want you to think this through very carefully because it's important. The church is a voluntary association. Is that true of the Worldwide Church of God? It's a voluntary association. It begins voluntary, becomes... What about the Roman Catholic Church? Is that a voluntary association? You're born there. Is it a voluntary association? Okay, we got some...
Well, yeah, you can get out of it.
Ah, now we have another voice heard from. Yes, it is. You can walk out of it. Do people walk out of the Worldwide Church of God? Sure they do. How many of you were in the Worldwide Church of God? Oh, that question's answered, Therefore, the Worldwide Church of God is a voluntary association. The Roman Catholic Church is a voluntary association. Everybody knows the CGI is a voluntary association. Now that we understand that, does that affect how we're going to work together? Should that affect our policy? Should it affect the policy of the Worldwide Church of God? Oh, yeah. In fact, one of the reasons they've got as many problems as they do have, one of the reasons why the church isn't bigger than it is, and more powerful and more effective than it is because they don't understand that. And it's one of the most fundamental and important things for anybody to understand. Do you realize that there is no direct line accountability in the church? There's not in the Roman Catholic Church, and there's not in the Worldwide Church of God, and there's not in this church. In the sense that somebody has the ultimate, all-powerful say over whatever is going to happen here. Now, whose church is it? Jesus Christ? Oh, yeah, absolutely that. I mean, we know. I'm not talking about real estate now. I'm talking about the church. We all know the church belongs to Christ, but it doesn't belong to the minister. It doesn't belong to you, the people. It doesn't belong to the home office. I stepped on that. I hope it's still working. Okay, keep an eye on me there. Anyway, it doesn't belong to us. We all know the church belongs to Christ. But now, after we've said that, effectively, who does the church belong to? To an observer. Somebody wanders in off the street, takes a good look at our organization, doesn't believe in God. Who controls this church in his eyes? Who's calling the shots? Who's making all these things work? Yeah, perceptively. Perceptively, they would tend to look at it that way. Now, let me ask you another question. Let's suppose in our little local congregation here that you already had wanted me to be a full-time minister. I've been working my own job, and you decide you're going to pay me a salary. Now who works for who?
Yeah.
Now who works for who? Now the minister works for the people. Or the council. Yeah. If they're going to pay him a salary, they have a right to say what time he gets to church and what time he goes home. And no, you just really got into a sacred territory. What he speaks. Now they would never do that, would they? A minister who is a very strong-willed person, a lot of character, would never adjust a sermon because it might cost him his job, or a salary, or a partial salary. Boy, we got some cynical people here. I will say this: there are ministers who would preach a given sermon even if it cost them their job. But I want you to understand something about that minister. There are sermons he would have preached that he didn't preach if it hadn't have been for the fact that he was looking over his shoulder at the local church council or board or whatever it was. Now, that's a very revealing concept when you think about that a little bit, that even that, when we introduce that little element in it, the local church now is going to pay you a salary, Now who works for whom? The whole rubber. Everybody knew. Everybody knows that everything changes when we actually do that. Now that's one of the reasons in the CGI that in the guidelines it makes a very specific statement that ministers are discouraged from taking any compensation for the local church other than necessary expenses. Whereas local churches can give their local pastor money for gas. They can give him money for a meal on the road if he's on the road. They can help him with his phone bill. If he's got a long-distance phone bill, then the local church can help. There's nothing wrong with that. We do, on the other hand, have ministers who do not accept help from the local church, even their expenses. They either pay them themselves, which some of them do, or they send them in here and we pay them. We pay the minister directly from here for his expenses. I really don't care how that is done as far as local churches are concerned, but if the minister is going to become salaried, and I'll tell you, there's even a modest problem with accepting expenses from a local church council, because you do open yourself up for criticism, for evaluation. That could be healthy as far as that's concerned. It could be healthy. It might be less likely to abuse it. You might be less likely to do certain types of things. I do think that in time to come, the ministry will decide that it's far healthier for the church for the ministry to be subject to the ministry. Rather, I can tell every minister in the church believes this. And I think that it will increasingly be reflected in policy in the church in years to come, and that when we do have full-time ministers, which in time to come we will have, they will all be salaried by the home office, not by local churches, because of the potential for corruption that exists in that situation. But that's a different matter, and that's a long-term policy thing. As things exist now, the guidelines do not forbid, but they do discourage ministers accepting compensation from the local churches. And my advice to ministers, by and large, is even that they get their expenses from here. Just submit an expense, accounting, all legitimate expenses. We are very happy to pay for field ministers who are out there beating the road, or going up and down, or burning up the phone lines trying to save people's lives. I mean, boy, send that phone bill in here. We'll help you with it. We're very happy to do that because it is something that, after all, most of the men who are doing the work in the church today are not being paid a dime for what they are doing. And compensation for expenses is eminently justified. Just be sure and give us a, backup on all that stuff. Yes?
Mr. Darton, in your honest opinion, do you think that that's the way it was done in the early New Testament church? Or?
Yeah, I think it really was. I get this hint out of 1 Corinthians that, in a manner of speaking, now I'll explain what I mean, that Paul was so painfully careful with the Corinthians not to accept a dime from the local congregation. And he actually went to work. Now, what he doesn't tell the Corinthians, doesn't mention to them in that particular letter, I don't think. He says, I work with my own hands. These hands did the work, and so forth. What he mentions to the Philippians, though, is that when he was down there, the Philippians sent money to him. That's right. In other words, he did accept money from people whom he was not serving. He accepted help from them. And that you can see the health in that. The way it looks, I'm not here to make a gain of you people. I'm not serving you for the money. And sure, I got money from these people up here, but that depended on their goodwill. They.
As far as the local ministry, then.
Pardon?
As far as the local ministry, I mean, doesn't it say let the.
There is no end. Yeah, there came a point in time. There came a point in time when there was a paid local ministry, and we really aren't told how they were paid. It is a logical assumption that they were, but it didn't have the international communications that we've got like we do today. So it's a logical assumption that the local ministry was paid locally. However, I think that we will probably find that when we were able to find out completely, that while the local ministry was paid locally, that they were supervised by somebody who was not. In other words, Timothy, as an evangelist, let's say, who worked an area, may not have been paid by some particular local congregation. And we may come to a situation where if we do have full-time men who are paid locally, when churches get big enough, we will have a regional man who isn't, who is supervising those particular individuals. There's got to be some credentialing and some accountability outside that local church. Otherwise, you have very great potential for corruption that can exist in that way. That's, again, philosophical, and it'll be something for the ministry to work out over the years to come. I feel very comfortable with the guidelines as they are right now. They will be amended toward the end of this year with a few things, and then we will all work together to hopefully make them what they ought to be. See, another thing to consider is the church is going to change. And there is no way of anticipating today exactly what the needs of the church will be 5 years from now. So you can only establish your policies with a full realization that, in fact, I think the original publication of the guidelines was for the year in question, had a date on them. And there will be subsequent ones dated that will be different. So I think we have to understand the church will, pardon the expression, evolve, and the changes that we make will be evolutionary. That we will drop those things that didn't work, or that we don't need anymore, that worked fine for the time, but they won't work in the future. It's axiomatic that the solution to today's problems is the cause of tomorrow's problems. And anybody that doesn't realize that's headed for trouble. Yes?
Just to comment on that local fund type deal. As long as your local fund is in good financial standing, there'll probably be no questions asked. If you got down to where it was getting close to zilch, and then some expenses came up, then people would start questioning. Is this necessary? Is this necessary?
Yeah, there will be a lot. That time will come, and I think that when a local church account begins to decline and go down to nothing, there's something going on here that somebody ought to at least pay a little attention to. It could be healthy. It may be that everybody just perceived, hey, we don't need this program, we don't need that program, and we want to support this central program. And if the real local needs are being met, but the fund is declining, big deal. It's not unhealthy at all. If the needs are not being met and the fund is declining, then I think somebody needs to ask why. What is it? What are we doing wrong? What is it we don't understand? Maybe we need to have a little meeting and talk this over, because the people are voting on this, and they're voting on it with their checkbook, and they do have that vote. Now, going on beyond this, where does the power, and I'm talking about effectively, in a local church originate, or in any church, let's say national or local? First of all, theoretically, where does it come from? Let's try the Roman Catholic Church. Theoretically, where does the power in the Roman Catholic Church originate? The Pope.
Home office.
In case that didn't make the tape and you want to know why I was laughing, he said the Home Office, right. Okay? Where does the power, theoretically, in the worldwide Church of God originate? Headquarters.
Not really. In a sense, you really have the people who support the church one way or the other. I mean,
okay,
if you cut off all the funds to the worldwide Church of God from the membership, there will be no power.
That's right. That's right. It comes as a bit of a shock, but when you think about it, you'll see why it's true. It doesn't make any difference whether it is the Roman Catholic Church or the Worldwide Church of God or the Church of God International. The power effectively originates at the grassroots. It's in the people. The reason is very simple. I ask you a show of hands, how many of you used to be in the Worldwide Church of God? You say you had no vote over there? Sure you did. You voted with your feet. You got up and left. You voted with your checkbook. You stopped supporting what you considered a corrupt regime, didn't you? Okay? Then you did have some power. Now, they may not have realized it when you left because it wasn't very much, but if enough of you had, they'd have known it was gone.
I misunderstood, really.
Yeah.
The guidelines or the power. The power is the support that people give.
That's correct.
Locally.
And if they didn't support the guidelines...
They can't come from the people.
No, they can't, but if we get guidelines the people won't support, where are we? We're dead. We are a dead duck. You know? So the power still originates at the people. Now, what's going on? Well, not just money. Attendance is power. You know, people actually, by being here or not being here, they vote on what's going on here. You know, the fact that you people don't attend over there anymore is a statement. You know, actually moving away, the attendance dropped down. There have been places in this country where the Worldwide Church of God's had to consolidate churches because the numbers declined. You know, there was something was going on at the grassroots. A statement was made. And in fact, in a few cases, the Worldwide Church of God went out there to look to see what it was and made some adjustments. Guess what you're saying? When you say that attendance in churches declined to the point that you're considering consolidation in a major city, and a man flies out from headquarters to look at what's going on and makes an adjustment, what have you said? You have said that all those people who did nothing more than stay home influenced the power structure of the church. Therefore, your attendance actually gives power to the headquarters. You know, it comes from the grassroots. It can be not only attendance, it can not only be money, it can be moral support. It can be encouragement. It can be acceptance of ideas. It can be heads nodded during sermons. It can be, any number of things that actually constitute power. Some churches, amen, coming out of the deacon's corner is support. That's politics, folks. When a couple of very influential deacons say amen when that pastor's up there talking about tithing, that's going to make a difference. It's going to make a difference. And so you definitely want to consider that that is the case. Each member can choose to share power with leaders and programs they like, or to withhold it from leaders and programs they do not like. And it's true in the Catholic Church, it's true in the worldwide church, and it's true in the Church of God International. And we ignore that reality at our peril. It is reality. Bob?
Believe it or not, I guess when you can, it's not only in just churches. I mean, you can look at Poland and communist Russia, and you have a very big bearing on whether or not the Pope has any influence in Poland, simply by whether or not the people will stand up and say, yes, we're going to have the Pope come to Poland or not.
That's correct.
Unfortunately, in the church, it should not be a matter of just the ability to persuade people one way or the other that this is the right way or the wrong way, but really from the Spirit of God that should influence.
Exactly, but you see, it really doesn't rest on persuasion as much as you think. Now, leadership is a factor in persuasion, but folks, if it isn't right, it's hard to persuade a lot of Spirit-filled people that they ought to do it. Now, I don't mean you can't do it. You know, you can actually, you can deceive people, and you can lie to them, or you can make them believe something that's not true. But the key element involved in this is that what I'm trying to say to you is there is a lot of power that exists at the grassroots of this church, that effectively, when I stand up in here and I lead you people, I am borrowing that power from you to do the job that I am trying to do. And if you did not give me that power, I could not do it.
In the case of, let me give you a reverse case.
All right.
In the case of the Church of Corinth, who ultimately rebelled against Paul and no longer recognized him as an apostle, from what I've read in most historically, who refused to support him and gladly supported others. We read in 2 Corinthians 11. Yet Paul maintained his status quo, his ministry, his working through the Spirit of God, despite what the local grassroots church did, and in their lack of support or lack of spiritual.
What you're saying is this: that if all the churches in the world stopped supporting Paul, Paul would still work. Of course he would. Would he do as much?
He could. By the Spirit of God, he can.
Well, let me put it to you another way. Let's suppose then that all of the membership of the Church of God International decide not to support Ted anymore. Can he do as much?
No.
Not anyway.
Well, God gave him miracles.
Oh, well, now, I am talking in terms of practically and effectively, and God is quite capable of doing that miracle at any time, but he has decided, this is something I think we need to understand, that God has put in all these people here his Holy Spirit. And that is where the power really exists. It does not exist solely in that one person. And for me to try to lead you in without consideration of that Spirit in you is folly. This is what I'm trying to say. I'm not talking about just sheer politics. This would be true of any small group you want to talk about. But the fact of the matter is it works practically the same way in the church. That you have got to think about what's going on in the minds of all these people because they got God's Spirit. And if the Spirit in you, in me, disagrees with the Spirit in you, we need to find out what's going on. Yeah.
Would it be safe to say that on the local level, those people have the power, right, of their own lives, but then we centralize it at the quote-unquote headquarters? This is the same as states' rights versus federalism. So I know that as you center power, the tendency towards corruption, at least historically, from what I've been able to read from my studies of history, becomes more corrupt.
That's correct.
Therefore, would it not be better to have a more decentralized base of power with representatives to the headquarters, like they went to Jerusalem and what have you, at that point, would that not be a more effectual way, more effective and effectual and loving?
In essential, what I'm telling you is that that's what exists.
But you just spoke a minute ago, Ron, about the ministers we paid from the local. I mean, from the central organization.
No. You misunderstand me. What I said was, and it went by you a little bit quick, I'm sure. What I said was that the ministry are subject to the ministry. To the ministry. The whole ministry. Not just to me and to Ted.
But if you pay them, they become subject to you. That's what you said.
No, but the point is... No, the point is... no, what I'm saying is that... No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we have to realize the power that exists at the grassroots level. It's it's a reality that must be dealt with. And that we would ignore that at our peril, and the Worldwide Church of God has ignored it and has been hurt badly by it. I'm saying about the ministry is that, I think where the confusion comes in people's minds is that they assume that all this power is centralized here in the home office. What power we have, and it is not all that much, quite candidly, is lent to us, not given, lent to us by people like you, who can take it back any time they want it. It is also lent to us by E.B., by Tom, by Larry, and by Vance, by all of our ministers, here, in Dallas, California, and all over the place. If the ministry of this church decide to come down on an issue, and this year at the conference, we had a terrific ministerial conference. The ministry were able to discuss issues freely, openly, and are beginning to develop a consensus. We are not talking about a centralized power in the home office. What I am talking about is that a minister will hold himself accountable, first of all, to Jesus Christ, secondly, to his fellow ministers. And that this whole question of eventually the I don't like that word, the paying of a salary to individuals, is going to have to be a joint decision made by the ministerial council, who are not all here. There are only 2 members of the ministerial council resident in Tyler. The rest of them are in the field. And so the sort of thing that you're talking about exists. In other words, the relying on... Now, we can change that. We could try to change it. We could start heading in another different direction. And if we were really effective at it, maybe we could pull it off. Your obligation is that whenever that begins to happen, to withdraw your support and not support what we are doing. Yeah, the potential for corruption is there. There is just as great a potential for corruption, believe it or not, at the local church level as there is here. You may not be able to do as much damage with it, but the potential for corruption at a personal level is just as great there as it is here.
Well, that's why you would ordain those people who are of the character that Paul described.
Yeah, that's certainly true. But you see, having done that, are you able to guarantee that your evaluation of his character was perfect to start with?
Well, neither were they able in the New Testament.
No, they were not. Are you able to guarantee that it's going to stay that way? No, you're not. Therefore, there must be a system of checks and balances in the church. This is why the local church council exists. One reason. I mean, they are the custodians of the physical property of a local church. The minister is responsible for the teaching and the education in the local church. We have made this division of powers in the local churches. But the local church council is in a position, if a minister goes bad, to maintain some cohesiveness in the local church, even though the minister has gone bad. And the minister is in a position, if the local church council goes bad, to blow the whistle on them so that the charter can be revoked, so everybody knows that Church of God International no longer accepts this local church anymore as one of ours. This is the beginnings of a system of checks and balances. Now, where we will be next year and the year after that depends on what we do, what all of us do, and how all of us communicate and how we carry on through with those things. And I can't tell you where we'll be a year from now because, again, this is a function of the ministry. It's not something I'm going to carry out unilaterally. I am going to borrow power from the ministry and from people like you. The power, I've borrowed power from you here today. You all have come here to listen to me talk today and to communicate back and forth with me. I'm borrowing power from you to put some stuff on tape here, which is going to go out to a lot of people. Right now 84, but that number will grow, and this tape will continue to be circulated for years to come as a discussion of some very relevant and very important issues in the church. But I have to consider, as I borrow that power from you, that you can take it back anytime you want to take it back. Now, does that mean that I'm going to be unfaithful to Jesus Christ in order to retain that power? It could. I could. But you see, who's going to judge that? Well, Christ is going to judge it, sure enough. But you also are going to have to judge it for yourself. And so on it goes. You know, there is no, you know, when we first started up down here, and I digress, but I think it's important to discuss it. We really spent a lot of time trying to work on our Constitution and bylaws and to get everything just right, and we wanted to protect ourselves against all the abuses of the past and this mistake and that mistake and the other mistake. And it was some time after that I sat down and I got to thinking about that one day, and I looked at that document again, and I thought, you know, all that work, and nobody ever looks at it anymore. You know, you send it out, I guess some new church is going to sign a statement saying they agree with the Constitution and bylaws. They probably read it. Nobody reads it anymore. And I realized all of a sudden, all we got to do is get the Board of Trustees together and amend it. And we can do that, you know, by giving them notice and getting them down here, and all of us, you know, get together and change that. And we got a whole new Constitution and bylaws again. The fact of the matter is that any organization like ours depends upon the goodwill of the people that are involved in it. And as they used to say, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. You know, we can't set up a system that is going to ensure success for the Church of God International. So that can't be done. But what can be done is that we can try to build trust with one another. We can learn to work together with one another. We get to know one another. We can become more interdependent with one another. And we can grow together in our ability to do the job we have to do. Now, I've been going all the way through this to explain something to you. That when we understand this matter of borrowing power from you to go and do a work, this is why, and of course the fact that means you've got to trust us to give us that amount of power. You've already expressed that. Now you don't necessarily trust me with every aspect of your life, but all you people here trust me to a certain level. It probably varies from person to person, but there is some degree or measure of trust that is here. Otherwise, you would never have lent me the power that you have lent to me in this situation. This is why wolves who enter into the flock work so hard at destroying trust. And it is the first thing, almost inevitably, that they start doing, is they start hacking away at the trust that we have been able to build up between us. And I mean by that, I don't necessarily mean your trust for me. I mean my trust for you. Because I got to trust you too. And a wolf comes into the flock, and just instinctively, they start working on that trust. Why would they do that? Why would they don't think about it. They do it instinctively. Why do you suppose that is? Divide and conquer is old. Ian?
It weakens the minister's power, base of power.
It drains off that power. It starts draining it off. In fact, by beginning to divide up the power in a local church and diffuse it, it's all still there. But it's no longer focused, and the potential for doing work is diminished. Works like a charm. And I've seen it so many times now, it's getting to be old hat. You know, I saw it in the Worldwide Church of God, I've seen it in this church, and I've seen it again and again and again. Now, that is why it is so important that the local church defend its ministry against attack. That you support your minister. When somebody comes into the church and starts hacking away and cutting at him, it's important that you back him up. What if he's wrong? What should you do if he's wrong?
Experience it, regroup, and keep on going. But
back row.
Use the analogy of the minister being the shepherd of the flock and the local people being the flock. You have to have that shepherd there to protect you from the wolves, number one. Without that, the sheep